Everyone's talking about generating more clean power, but the real challenge isn't generation. It's delivering it reliably across a decaying grid burdened by decades of underinvestment.
And today we are laying out why America's grid is the bottleneck in clean energy age and how on-site solar isn't just a nice to have, it's essential infrastructure.
Let's dive in.
This is Wired for Power, where the energy of ideas meets the force of execution. Let's get to work!
All right, welcome back to Wired for Power. I'm Amorah Sandberg, Head of Business Development at Power.
And I'm Dustin Markowski. Today, we tackle the grid delivery crisis, with estimates showing we need $23 to $25 trillion in upgrades by 2030 just to keep pace.
And by the end of this episode, you're going to understand how our aging infrastructure is stopping growth and why commercial solar provides a clear solution. So today, power grid. This is a super popular topic. I don't know if you've noticed, celebrities, Dennis Quaid, podcasts. It feels like the power grid, something that wasn't normally talked about, is starting to get picked up by like mainstream media.
I think even when you first started working with us, a while back, I remember the very first conversation we had, you were talking about a documentary you had watched on Netflix about the same thing.
I know.
Right?
I've been pretty obsessed with this for a long time. That's why when I came here, I'm like, this is completely aligned with what I want to do. The power grid is a big one. And when more people aren't worried about it, I'm like, no, what could happen? It's all doomsday. There are answers, which are good. And I think obviously what we're going to talk about, commercial solar, is a big one. But this is something that I'm surprised isn't being talked about more.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like we always hear about like how the cost of energy is increasing, it's rising, it's so expensive. But the truth is like the cost to generate electricity is actually really cheap, right? It's about 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's been 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour for a really long time. So it's been pretty consistent. And it doesn't matter if you look at coal versus hydroelectric versus solar, like it's all about 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour to go produce that kind of energy. So, or electricity. So it is relatively consistent. And so when you kind of look at it and say, well, why is it then the costs keep going up consistently? And it's because to get that power from wherever it's being delivered over to you, that's where all the cost is. And it's been so bad and decaying so much that, and we haven't put in the amount of care that it's needed to keep it up to speed, that like the cost is getting out of control.
And and when we're talking about the delivery, it's like it's the actual infrastructure of how this is delivered. That's really
Exactly.
what the problem is.
Exactly right. You live in whatever city or town that you live in, and the power is generated somewhere else. And sometimes it's got to run miles or even hundreds of miles to get it to where you are. So it's interesting when you look, like if you were to do some research on this or like read articles about this, right? Estimates usually run anywhere from $3 to $5 trillion on what's needed for our grid. And it's not a wrong number. But most of the time when you kind of like peel back the curtain and look at all the details, that 3 to 5 trillion just is like kind of gets us to where we're at today. Right. But if you look at like the progression of how much energy we're supposed to use, by 2030 and beyond, that number starts to look like 23 to 25 trillion dollars, which is ridiculous, right? Like we think about all the things that we're putting onto this grid right now, and there's no signs that it's slowing down, right?
Yeah. You hear those numbers, like if you can Google it, right? It's $5 trillion for a complete replacement of the grid, but does not actually include the depreciating value of the actual infrastructure over time. So we got to think of things like power plants, transmission lines, distribution equipment, transformers, poles, all those types of things really do go in the cost. So to actually modernize everything, you're right, it's 4 to 5 times that. So we're looking in the 25 trillion plus range.
And we're still building data centers,
Oh yeah.
right? They're like with AI, like that number is increasing tremendously. We're building EV charging networks all across this country to, provide for all of the growing number of electric cars that we have out there. And the grid, like we're just trying to maintain what we have today. So
Yeah,
it's not catching up.
Yep. And then if you think about why isn't it catching up? If we have all those things, we are using AI, we are using EV chargers. I mean, all those things are a normal part of our life. Why wouldn't it catch up? Like if you think about it, like why not, right? So, like the only things like and then the things that kind of go around my mind a little bit when we're thinking about that is okay, so there's like permitting delays, right? There's probably way more demand than we've ever thought of. So it like, will we ever catch up? That's the big question. And then I think there's local and government resistance with a lot of these things, right? It kind of goes back to the voter, which we should probably touch on in a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Um,
that's
yeah.
well. So let's look at this massive number, right? Bloomberg, I think, has put together an estimated global grid overhaul at like $21 trillion from 2020 to 2050, right? That's a globally scaled number, right?
Over
But in the
30 years,
US
though,
was
that's a long time.
right, exactly right. But here's the thing is one, the costs between 2020 and 2025 to do that work has nearly doubled. And in the US, we're looking at an amount that's really more than that number that they come up with, right? Just to meet our needs by like 2035, right?
Uh-huh.
So with the widening estimates, basically, the more you unpack and you uncover an issue as you dive deeper and deeper into it, all of a sudden you realize that, oh, well, not only do we have to kind of fix make sure that we have enough ability to use the energy that we need today, but if we need 30% more or 50% more or 100% more power in 3, 5, or 10 years, does that mean we need to double our infrastructure? And the truth is, like, probably don't need to double it, but there is a lot of modernization that needs to, come that needs to come up. That's the numbers that, the $5 trillion estimates and the different numbers that we're seeing really talk about just sunk infrastructure costs and not about like, hey, making sure that this thing can scale to what we need in 5 years from now.
Well, and then you got to think about like where does this money come from to invest into the modernization of the
Yeah.
grid.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere, and I have this written down here. Deloitte reported 1.4 trillion in power investments between the years of 2025 and 2030.
Yeah.
1.4 trillion. That's it. That's like a fraction of what is actually needed. And then
Yeah.
you kind of say like, okay, like
And that, I
why
think that number, by the way, is private and public. Or like,
it is.
it's, you know what I mean? And which actually kind of brings up like to your point of the voters, like, who's going to pay for it? Are we going to, is the government's going to pay for this infrastructure
Right.
like they subsidized when we kind of first built out the grid? Or is it the utility company's responsibility? The truth is, we ultimately pay it.
Well, and then okay, well also if this needs to get brought up to the voters, right? They need to know what's happening. And I think it's becoming more popular. And I'm wondering, is it just popular to me because I'm in this industry, right? Does the everyday voter know what the actual problem is? Are they aware of this? Right? Like if you're a politician standing on this topic is not very sexy, right? Like who's gonna rally behind a new high power voltage line in their backyard?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want that in my backyard, right? So you get some of those things and you get some of that pushback, and it actually makes sense to how we got here.
Yeah. Side note, but as I was researching, there was 5.5 million lines of electricity, of wire, basically cables that run all this to our homes and our businesses and everything. Only 20% of those are underground.
Really?
And so a lot of utility companies are, saying, hey, listen, we need to put more and more of these wires underground, these cables underground.
Uh-huh.
It makes the grid more resilient. It makes it less prone to, natural disasters and things like that, wildfires, hurricanes, etc. Um, but at the same time, that's also a huge cost, right? And
Right.
80% of our infrastructure is above ground. So again, when you look at it, utilities, when they're spending money, most of the time they're spending money, the majority of their money is to fix things that are very far behind, right? And so you see capital spend increasing from utilities. 287 billion, excuse me, in 2003. But here now in 2023, 20 years later, it's only 320 billion.
Interesting.
So, considering how much, inflation has affected things and the cost of things, like they're still spending roughly, actually probably less in as far as the amount of dollars by comparison in
Of what is
2023 than
actually
we even
needed.
did in 2003.
Yeah, because in 2003, AI isn't what AI is in 2025.
Exactly.
I actually read the other day, I don't know if you've heard this one, that AI data centers are this last year, I believe it was, accounted for 5% of the total US electricity consumption. And then they're projecting by 2028 it's going to be 12%. But I truly don't think those numbers are going to be right. I think it's going to be a lot more by 2028 because I don't think the studies and these things that are going around are not accounting for how fast this growth has become, right? And
Exactly.
like, if you ask us in like 2023, is AI going to be to where it is today in 2025? And nobody expected it to be this big, where it's
Well,
in our everyday lives and like already. So where is it going to be in 3 years from now? Will it really be just 12% of the electricity consumption, or is it going to be a lot higher? I think it's going to be higher.
I mean, X this last year put together, a data set. Was it in 19 days? They created their AI data center in 19 days. And
Crazy.
I think the CEO of NVIDIA was like, in order to do this, usually the amount of years it would take to put this into place and to make it happen is, I think it was like 18 months or something like that. And
Yeah.
so the fact that they were able to do it in 19 days, one, speaks to their ability to pull it together, but also shows you this is the speed that this part of the industry is working at. And the power demands are incredible. We're actually working with a new data center, AI data center, that's going into place right now in this country. And there is no infrastructure to support it from an electric point of view. And so they're
Right.
saying we have to build this thing to assume that what if we can't get power? And so how do we do that? How do we scale so that we can be independent? Yet we do want to be connected to the grid at some point. Like that is important, but we also need to be able to move faster. And so it's interesting to see how we're solving these problems from a decentralized point of view, as opposed to going, because normally when you do construction, you're like, hey, we need to do all of our general engineering first. And they're saying, listen, yes, we want to be doing that. But at the same time, speed is so important that we're willing to say, let's go figure out a way to do it without those requirements in place.
But I think it's all going to catch up too, because if the number one like constraint to us expanding AI, right, and doing some probably things that none of us can even imagine, it's the access to power, and it's like going to come down to the grid, and it's going to come down to the stress on the grid. So us actually, as humanity, growing and getting to that next level and like understanding how to cure things and just take advantage of AI and like where it really could go, it's going to
Yeah.
be slowed down just from the sheer need of electricity that just
Well,
won't have access to.
while you're talking about access, um, one of the things that's really interesting is we're seeing an increasing number of cyber and physical threats
Yeah,
to our grid as well, right? Like the Department of
right.
Energy, I think, flagged a 77% year over year spike in physical grid attacks in 2022. Right. So when, going to that documentary you were watching, I think that
Yeah,
was part of the topic, right? Is we're looking at, it's not just weather, right? It's
yeah.
not just not the demand that we're putting on it, but now we have to factor in things like sabotage and cyber and really this all kind of straining reliability of the grid.
You can turn on
right?
Netflix and watch a very good movie. It's completely fictitious, but I'm like, why are we giving people ideas to attack the grid?
Yeah,
But it is a concern. I mean, if this is coming out like mainstream media and like this is the plot for movies, I'm not surprised that they've had this many attacks and how much that is rising over the last few years.
yeah,
Um, so like on top of some of these other things, we have to talk about like grid connection um process and like how that has actually become a bit jammed up. So I've heard that the backlog of projects waiting to hook into the system um rose by 27% in 2023. We don't have the numbers for 2025, but I'm guessing those are just growing as well.
yeah,
So what actually used to take 2 years to connect into now takes about 5 years.
yeah. These delays cost developers capital. Sometimes entire projects, right, being blown up. And the problem is only expected to worsen really without some kind of aggressive reform.
So this is where commercial solar shines. On-site generation bypasses the need for transmission upgrades, right? So energy is built and used on-site. This avoids congestion. This improves sustainability.
Yeah, like if we think about it, if the problem is our centralized way of producing and transmitting energy, then decentralizing it may be able to prove to be an option. And so the real option is well, how do you get rid of transmission altogether? That's hyper local production, where we generate on site the energy that we actually consume. And so this is one of the most beautiful things about solar, is everywhere in the world the sun comes up every single day. So there's a couple of places where you might have a couple of days where it doesn't come up in the far north, but for the most part, right, it's we know what that is and it's predictable, and you can use that source of energy to help make sure that we don't have to worry about transmission. So one of my favorite examples here, when we think about congestion, we think about resiliency, is a food processing facility that we were working with, right? And they were facing, I think it was $2 million in costs to upgrade to get more utility power for their new line, right? And I think they were fine with paying the cost to do it. That wasn't an issue for them. But their bigger issue was it was going to take them 18 months before they could see those upgrades. And they're like, what it would cost us to have that power to be able to solve the problem, that's worth way more to us. And so they were able to, obviously avoid the costs of those upgrades through, adding rooftop solar, using storage to be able to help handle the additional demand. But we also took their 18-month timeline down to under 9 months. And so they were able to make sure that they were able to deliver this in a much faster way and get that whole new production facility up and running. So, we've also helped keep warehouses online during rolling blackouts. When you think about, and again, looking at a food processing plant, like if you have food that spoils because you don't have refrigeration, that's a massive problem, right? That can cost you millions, tens of millions of dollars in just what you have on hand. So being able to have resiliency against that, I think, is really key, and have that kind of redundancy in place. But then you get this nice little benefit of all of their neighbors now of these guys basically got the benefit of having the reduced burden on the grid that they all share and use, which is pretty cool.
So like also what you're saying there too then is by having solar and kind of going that route, we're actually taking probably a little bit of the burden off of the grid, right? Because it's like
Exactly right.
mitigating where it's coming from. And
It's
so, like,
not
if
just
we're talking
solving.
about delivery, like we did in the beginning, no more delivery on site. So, hey, if you choose to do this, you're taking the burden and the bigger problem. You're helping not contribute to the problem, I guess is the way to say it.
Exactly. You're not
Okay,
just solving for your own immediate problems,
right.
but you're actually bringing a community benefit as well.
It's amazing. So, what does that mean for business owners? How
Well,
should they think about this?
yeah. So, I mean, one, you're not just installing solar, right? You're procuring power independence. You're mitigating delivery risk, and you're avoiding, volatility, both on the availability of power, but also in price volatility as well.
And then, if obviously that's the business end, if you are on the sales side and in this solar industry, um, if you can position this as actual infrastructure, not just a roof system, I think this really elevates your pitch and you really just start to understand what you're talking about, right? You're delivering sustainability, not just savings. We
Yeah,
get
I
both.
think that's exactly right. Like when we think about, for all of our partners out there, right? When you think about how do we make sure that we're helping to solve business problems, and helping to solve more than just one business problem. Deliverability, I think, is your secret weapon. It's not about selling green. It's not about saving money. It's about, hey, like you have resiliency, you have operational stability, and now you have predictability when it comes to downtimes that you actually usually have planned in to your schedule because of unforeseen events that you now no longer have to worry about.
Absolutely. I love that. So let's kind of go through some of the takeaways. I know this was a lot to go through, and I kind of feel like within this conversation, we probably could have had 5 to 6 different podcast topics on this. This is
Probably.
such a big issue, and I think it's something that everyone should get smart about. You should read about it. There's plenty of content out there to digest and like understand where this is. But I think one of the takeaways is, the U.S. grid is obviously decaying, and modernization is really going to cost 23 to 25 trillion in the next 5 years, and that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I think, for as a second takeaway, thinking about rising demand, attacks, permitting delays, all of these bottleneck issues and things that we're talking about, right? Really means that the grid as it stands now just can't keep up.
Yep. And then as a solution, on-site commercial solar is a structural solution, not just a luxury. And we could talk about that all day long.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it becomes a solution to future proofing your business and being able to produce over the long term. Um, yeah, it's not something that's a nice to have. It's something that really business owners need to be thinking about is, do you have the resiliency? Do you have the backbone in place to make sure that you're delivering in 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Yep. And then for everyone that is speaking to businesses and trying to get solar out there, the story and how you differentiate and equip your clients with solutions, not just panels. This is part of that story. So it's something definitely to remember and to do your research on.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you're a business owner or executive, right, you're facing growth, or even resiliency concerns, reach out to us at power.solar. We'll help give you an assessment. We can help figure out like what advantage is there to being able to produce something on site.
Absolutely. Well, great. This has been another fun episode. Looking forward to the next one. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe and rate.
Yeah. Let's build something powerful.